Don't forget to click over to the PowerPoint too after you go live.
We are live and probably don't need to make this public, but I'm already on the page here.
Brianna.
Hello.
I like the hair.
Thank you.
So we are continuing. We ready to start?
Almost.
Okay.
I'm turning my Bible to Esther. Why is it Esther, not Esther?
What? Did I spell it wrong?
No, you spelled it right. I'm just saying, why do we pronounce it Esther and not Esther?
I don't know. Alright, turn your Bibles to the book of Esther.
Esther.
And we are continuing. This is lesson 2 of the Women of Faith series. Last week, do you guys remember who we talked about? Wow, you weren't even here. Yeah, last week was Ruth, this week is Esther. And I want to get a little bit of the background to the book. Alright, moving on from Esther. In Esther 1, well, does somebody want to read verses 1 to 6?
Of Esther 1?
Yeah, Esther 1.
I'll read it. Now in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones.
Okay, and as you continue reading, there is a description of more stuff that the king had to this feast. And so we read in some versions, in Esther 1 and verse 1, it reads, in the year of King Xerxes. And in this version it says
Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus. So that raises the question, what is the difference? I think what I understand is Ahasuerus and Xerxes are the same name but different spellings, maybe.
Different languages, probably.
Different languages.
Xerxes, I know, is Greek. Ahasuerus is probably Hebrew or maybe Aramaic.
So it's the same person, just a different language. We see, well, it's not exactly the same as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but it's similar.
It's Hebrew.
It's Hebrew, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so Xerxes is Hebrew?
No, Xerxes is Greek.
Xerxes is Greek, Ahasuerus Hebrew, and so it's correct any way you put it. And so we read that this takes place in the year of King Xerxes. And we also read of the place in Esther 1 and 2. It is in those days when King Ahasuerus or Xerxes sat on the throne of his kingdom, that is in Shushan or Citadel, or some people call the place Susa. So we are in the year of the King Ahasuerus. We're in Susa. And chapter 1 starts out with this 180-day feast that the king plans. In the 30th year of his reign, he made powers of Persia and Media, the nobles, the princes of the province, that he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and his excellent majesty in many days, 180 days in all. So this king is proud. New kingdom, I want to show that off, and so that's what he's doing for 120 days. If you drop down to verse 16, this really is the background for Esther herself when Queen Vashti is summoned and she refuses to come to the king's banquet, to the king's party, probably because this king was gonna be drunk anyway. And so the king is upset about that. In chapter 1, verse 16, it says, and Mucin answered before the king and princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also the princes and all the people who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. The queen's behavior will become well known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report. King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. And so he's saying this is going to set a precedent for all the women if you don't do anything about it. These women are going to be unruly, and they're not going to be obedient, so you have to do something about Queen Vashti not coming. And if he doesn't, well, that makes him look like a pushover. You know, the queen can do whatever she wants, so I can do whatever I want. That's what I have over the background of the book. Is there any questions or comments over what we talked about in chapter 1?
I've always laughed at this beginning because if you look, the reason that he summons Vashti is to show off her beauty. This whole scenario is just the king showing off. He's showing off his power. He's showing off all the stuff he has. Then he wants to show off his beautiful queen.
Right.
You know, she has the audacity to say, no, I'm not going to stand on a pedestal and be a spectacle for everybody to look at.
And this was probably in the middle of a drunken party, too.
Yeah, it even says in verse 10, when the heart of the king was merry with wine.
Right.
That's when he summons her.
Anything else? Alright, well, in chapter 2, we read that Esther is chosen queen. And could I get somebody to read chapter 2, 1 through 4?
I will.
Alright.
Later, King Xerxes was not so angry. Then he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and he remembered about his order about her. Then the king's personal servants had a suggestion. They said, "Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king choose supervisors in every area of his kingdom. Let them bring every beautiful young virgin to the palace at Susa. These women should be taken to the women's quarters and be put under the care of Haggai. He is the king's eunuch in charge of the women. And let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the girl who most pleases the king become queen in place of Vashti." The king liked this advice, so he did as they said.
Alright, thank you. And so King Xerxes, probably when he was more sober, more rational, his vast society wasn't as angry. He could think clearly, and he said, "Well, I kind of need a queen now. I banished Vashti, and he had, look at verse 1, he remembered Vashti and what she had done. So that makes me think that he kind of forgot due to his alcohol consumption, and now it's almost if he's waking up from that and says, "Wait a minute, I don't have a queen. What happened last night?" So in 1 through 4, there is this replacement search. I don't have a queen, and so verse 4, "Then let young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." Verse 3, he says, "Gather all the beautiful young virgins to the quarters, that I may pick which one pleases me." And so they search for a replacement. And in verse 5 to 7, we come to Susan Citadel, and the text focuses in on a girl named Ruth. Not Ruth, Esther.
Say wrong one.
See, I do that with everything, not just Bible reading. Young woman named Esther. And we see the description of Esther in verse 7. Does somebody want to read that?
Verse 7.
Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died.
Now, if you can't remember the book of Esther, remember this. This is the book where there are so many different name changes, seems like. And here's another one, not really a name change, but rather a name translation from probably Hebrew to Greek. Esther's Greek name was Hadassah. Esther's Hebrew name was Hadassah probably, and Esther was her Greek name, and the scholar is checking me on that.
I wouldn't say I'm a scholar, but
But she is described as a verse 7, an orphan, neither father nor mother. She's taken in by her uncle Mordecai, and she is also described as a beautiful young woman. She was lovely and beautiful. just a pop quiz to you. Esther's one of many people in the Bible who we read of their physical appearance. Can anybody name some?
Physical appearance?
Yeah, there are a couple people named for their physical appearance beside Esther in the Bible.
There's the sons of Jesse. They're the first ones I think of.
That's right. Anybody else? I was thinking about Joseph is described in chapter 39 as handsome. Saul was described as tall and handsome, looking above everybody. And so the Bible rarely, like Nick illustrated, we don't read much of the appearance of these people, and the fact that Esther is beautiful here is significant in that will play a role in what is about to transpire, and that is in verse 8. So when the command and decree was heard, when many young women were gathered in Susan the citadel under the custody of Hagar, that Esther also was taken to the king's place in the care of Hagar, the custodian of women. And we find while she's there that she had 6 months of beauty preparations in verses 9 to 14.
Man, how long does it take to put some makeup on?
Well, back then they probably had to make all the makeup.
And so this was thorough. You were going to be presented to the king. You wanted to look your best. And also, I want to mention that VeggieTales is wrong here. This was not a beauty competition like we often think of. This was more. This is more sexual, I guess. More of a harem situation. Who's going to be the best mate for this king? And
Like
so,
The Bachelor.
probably more on The Bachelor.
Or the Bachelorette.
Well, no, because Xerxes is a guy.
Oh yeah, I got confused. Never mind. No. Never mind.
And so at the end of the 6 months of preparation treatment in chapter 2, 15 to 18, she appears before the king, and verse 18 says, Then the king made a great feast, the feast of Esther, of all his officials and servants. He proclaimed a holiday in the province and gave gifts according to the generosity of the king. So Esther here is chosen as queen. She had these beauty preparations, and verse 17 says, the king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight. So Esther is chosen here as queen. That takes us to verse 18 of chapter 2. Is there any comments through verse 18 questions?
It seems to me, I was looking at it while you were talking. It seems like, where is it at? The name, Hadassah is her Hebrew name. I don't know what language Esther is. I don't think it's Greek. I almost wonder if it's like her Persian name. Could be Greek. I don't know
Could
if it's
be.
Greek or not.
I don't know. So without any authority, I said Greek because I didn't look it up. I just assumed the way Hadassah sounded, that sounded Hebrew, and Esther Greek, but maybe it's possibly Persian.
Because how it's written in the Hebrew, see, with Xerxes, it's just one word, and it's translated either as Ahasuerus or Xerxes. But with Hadassah and with Esther, that's actually two different words in the Hebrew that are written. So I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know what language Esther is, but they transliterated it into the Hebrew. I bet you it's probably Greek, but it could be whatever language the Persians spoke.
Anyway, it was a different language. And so that takes us to verse 18 of chapter 2. When a major theme in the book of Esther is plots and palaces. I kind of did a gym thing here. Plots and palaces, chapter 2. End of chapter 2, there's going to be a plot against the king. Chapter 3, another plot. Chapter 4, uncovering that plot. And so you have plots and then you have palaces because this happens within. The first one happens within the king's palace. The second one happens outside of, the second one actually happens closer to the king, Haman, and so you have the idea of plots and palaces. And the first one we read of is in chapter 2:19 through 22. And what this is that Mordecai sat within the king's gate, verse 19, and verse 21, while Mordecai is sitting in the king's gate, there are two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, doorkeepers. They're plotting to kill the king. They were angry for some reason. They became furious and they sought to lay hands on the king. So Mordecai tells Esther about the plot, and in chapter 2, verse 22, the king tells Esther about the plot. Verse 22 says, so the matter became known to Mordecai. He told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Mordecai told Esther, Esther tells the king's life was spared, and both those criminals were hanged on the gallows in verse 23. And so that is the first plot, but when we get into chapter 3, there is another plot. And this plot stems from some place that is much closer within the king's palace, and that is Haman, the right-hand man to King Xerxes. And he goes into the king and he is kind of talking to the king. And in verse 8 he says, then Haman said to the king Ahasuerus, there's a certain people scattered and dispersed among your people in all the province of your kingdom. Their laws are different than all other people's, and they do and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. There's a people out here that have a different law than you. You gotta do something about this, king. And then in verse 9, if it pleases the king, let a decree be given that they be destroyed, and I will pay you 10,000 talents of silver into hands who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries. King, you gotta destroy those people, and I'll even pay you to do it. I'll give you 10,000 talents of silver, verse 9, for this to be done. And that was a lot of money. I didn't calculate how much that would be in our time, but 10,000 talents of silver. And so that makes you think how many, how much hatred went into this. You know, he's willing to pay that much to the king, and that was not an insignificant amount. Well, word comes to Esther in the kingdom.
I calculated it. It's over $16 million.
Yeah, so $16 million to destroy the Jews.
Because a talent of silver was 75 pounds. So it's 75,000 pounds of silver. Silver is like 200 something per pound. So.
Well, so 75?
One talent is 75 pounds. He gave 10,000 talents. So he gave him 75,000 pounds of silver.
Wow.
That's a lot.
So that just tells you how much Haman wanted the Jews eliminated. And the reason was Mordecai, we read of verses 1 through 8, Mordecai, Esther's uncle, refused to bow to Haman. And so Haman kind of has a overdramatic reaction. He won't bow, I'll kill all the Jews. You know, seems kind of petty to me. But he refused to bow in the beginning of chapter 3. When you get to chapter 4, and I know I'm going fast, but Esther's 9 chapters, and we got 15 minutes left. And in Esther chapter 4, Esther ends up hearing of this plot from Haman, from Mordecai, and what it is that happens in chapter 4 to 9 is that Haman is outside the king's house, and he's fasting, and his clothes are all torn up, and he's wailing, and Esther hears about this from a guard, and she says, why are you tearing your clothes? Why do you have sackcloth? And she tells, and Mordecai tells Esther about the plot to kill the Jews. And so in verses 10 to 14, does somebody want to read this? Esther, Mordecai really faces Esther with a choice here.
I'll read it. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and commanded him to go to Mordecai and say, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter, so that he may live. But as for me, I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. And then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this."
Right, so that's the verse that we all remember, verse 14, right? Such a time as this. Mordecai says, you have an option here. You have two options. Esther's choice was risk death so that many can live, or live and many will die. That's the choice. And before this, Mordecai says you gotta go to the king and request the deliverance. And she says, I can't do that. The king has not called me for many days. And if you went to the king at that time uncalled for, you would die. And so does this predicament sound familiar? Risk death so many can live, or live and many will die? Where have we heard that before? Does that principle sound familiar?
Jesus.
That's right. It's the idea of substitution in John 3:16. Same predicament. One life for many, or if that one life doesn't die, many will die. In John 3:16. And so we see kind of the shadow of Jesus here. I don't want to stretch it too far, but you can kind of see that principle. Esther is faced with this predicament. And so, is there any comments or questions on that before we move on here?
I'm trying to find it, but someone says that of Jesus, like almost verbatim. It's better that one would die than that many would die. It's Caiaphas, I think, that says it. I'm trying to find where that is.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot to put that up here. That would have been perfect. Well, when you find that, we'll come back to you.
I'm going to Google it.
Okay. We'll wait for you then.
John 18, I think, is where it's at.
John 18.
John 18 and verse 14. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people.
That's right. That's the idea here. And if I teach this class again, I'm going to add that in my notes. Thank you.
It says it in John 11 also. This is the actual quote. John 11, verse 50, "Nor do you understand that it is better for you that one man should die for the people, not that the whole nation should perish."
That's right. And so that is the choice that Esther is faced with. Good comment. And so a fast is held for 3 days in chapter 4. And finally, Esther says, hold a fast for me for 3 days, and then I will go into the king and call for. And then she says, if I perish, I perish. She is ready to stand up for her people, and she knows that she might die. This is one mission that she might not return from, and she's ready to embrace that reality to save her people. And so Esther goes before the king in chapter 5. And basically, what happens in chapter 5, 1 through 4, uh, the, 1 through 8, is that she goes before the king and announced in verse 2. When the king saw her, she found favor with him, and the king reached out his golden scepter and says, come here. And the king asked her, what is it that you wish, Queen Esther? Verse 3. And Esther says, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I prepared for him. And so she found favor in the eyes of the king. And there is an invite to the banquet. She invites him to a banquet. I don't know if she was nervous and didn't have the courage, or she wanted to butter him up, or what, but she says, come and eat with me. Let's eat together. And she eventually invites them to a second banquet after that banquet gets over in chapter 5 and verse 8. And in chapter 5 and chapter 7, we read of these two banquets. And both banquets were held in chapter 5 and verse 6, in chapter 7 and verse 11. In banquet number 2, oh, sorry.
You go backwards.
I went backwards.
I don't have this problem in PowerPoint.
Yeah.
You and your Apple.
In banquet in chapter 7, and I'll pause here after chapter 7 because I've done much more after that. In chapter 7, at banquet number 2, in verses 3 and 4, does somebody want to read that? Chapter 7, 3 and 4.
I will. Then Queen Esther answered and said, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. Had we been sold as male and female slaves, I would have held my tongue, although my enemy could never compensate for the king's loss.
So Esther comes before the king and she says, King, my people are going to be annihilated. Please grant my request. And she says, if we were just going into slavery, I would have held my peace. There would be no reason for me to bring this up. But we're going to be killed, we're going to be annihilated, and the king's response was, rage. Really, if you look at verse 5, it reads like you're angry. Who is he and where is he? Who would dare presume in his heart to do such a thing? Who's gonna kill my king, my queen, he says. And then he says, she says it is Haman. Haman is the man, the adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman, and Haman, the king goes to get the guards, and while the king's gone, Haman pleads for his life because he knows what's about to happen. He's about to go to the gallows. And in chapter 5, in verse 10, it says, so they hanged Haman on the gallows that he prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided. This was taken care of. But before we wrap up with the salvation of the Jews, is there any comments on that? Alright. I gotta hurry it up.
You have like 2 minutes.
And so in chapter 8, we read that the decree that Haman made could not be revoked. It was written, it was signed, and it could not be revoked. Verse 8, it was with the king's signet ring, to whatever is written in the king's name is sealed with the king's signet ring, and no one can revoke it. Because of this, a new decree was made, and that decree was that the Jews were able to protect themselves from this attack. The attack was inevitable, but the Jews could protect themselves from it. And in chapter 9 and verse 6, we read that the Jews did just that. And in Susan, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men, also for Syria, Diphthong, and all these different places. The Jews were able to protect themselves. There are 3 applications that we can make today. We need to stand out. And that's what Esther did. Esther stood out even when it was hard. She went before the king unsummoned. We need to be willing to sacrifice for others, just like Esther did, just like Jesus sacrificed for us in Philippians 2:5-11. And also, don't be afraid ever to stand up for what you think is right. In Acts 4:13, that's what the apostles did, and that's what Apostle Paul did there in chapter 28, verses 28-30. It might not work out like you would like it did with Esther, but it's never wrong to stand up for what you believe is right. And because Esther did so, she saved herself and her people. And because Esther saved the Jews, the Messiah could come, that is Jesus. And that's all I have for this week. Is there any other questions or comments before we go up front? Thank you all for your time. We can go up front.